Welcome to Heresy, the Horus Heresy talk show. In this video, we're going to be talking about HQ units for the Solar Auxilia in Horus Heresy, the Age of Darkness. This is part 3 of a multi-part series, so do make sure you check out the other videos reviewing this army as well. We're going to be talking about the Legate Marshal, who's the commander of the Solar Auxilia forces, the Command Tercio, that is their main HQ choice with lots of options, and also going through some recommended builds for how to use your HQ choices in your Solar Auxilia armies. But before we do that, if you enjoy the show, please do like and subscribe on YouTube. Do leave me any feedback in the comments below. And don't forget to join us on the Heresy Discord community as well, which is linked in the video description below. And now, on with the show. The Legate Marshal is the leader of the Solar Auxilia forces, and he's only 85 points, and he's got a pretty good stat line for what you pay for him. Weapon skill and BS 5, initiative, wounds, and attacks 4, which is, you know, in terms of wounds and attacks, the equivalent of a Praetor in Terminator armor. So more wounds than a normal Praetor, which is pretty good. He's leadership 10, and he's got a 3+ save from his heavy void armor and a 5+ invulnerable from his refractor field. He's stubborn as well, and he's battle hardened. Now, the stats he does suffer in is he's got strength and toughness 3, because he's a human. So the battle hardened makes up for most of the important part of the toughness he's missing, which is the instant death threshold. Often in melee, where he's going to be hit, most weapons are going to wound you on a 2 anyway, regardless of your toughness. So that's not a big deal, but he is 1 point of strength down, which means that even with a Thunder Hammer, he's not going to be able to instant death Space Marine characters in combat, which is the main place he suffers. But generally, his stat line's pretty good for his points. You know, compared to Centurions, you know, with their stat lines, and compared to Praetors, he's pretty competitive for what you pay for him. Even if you pay for his upgrades, which we'll talk about in a minute, to get him to the 2+, you know, 4+ invulnerable save level that those Space Marine characters enjoy, he's still only 110 points. So pretty good, really, all round for the points you pay. And obviously, you're going to take one in every army, pretty much because he enables cohort doctrines as well. So it's nice that he is a good character, since he's, you know, a must include, really. He's going to have leadership 10 to your whole army if he's in a unit with a command vox. So command voxes usually come in the command squads of tercios. So in the infantry tercios and the elite tercios and the HQ tercios, as long as he joins one of those, he can give his leadership 10 to everybody in the army with the appropriate vox equipment. He grants his stubborn to units that he joins, as all stubborn units do. So that's a nice thing as well. So leadership 10 and stubborn means most units aren't going to go anywhere. Now he is heavy because of his heavy void armor, but the close order battle trait gives the same disadvantage to a lot of units in the army anyway. So a lot of the time that won't be a real disadvantage, but some units he might join, he might give them those negatives to their movement and the inability to run if you're not careful. But if you switch him to Artificer armor for 10 points, you can drop that heavy off him as well. Like most generals, he's got quite a lot of equipment options. So he's got the Thunder Hammer that he can take, of course. Now, that is only 15 points for him, a little bit cheaper than most things. Good for general purpose killing. It's not going to instant death Space Marines as it would if he was strength 4 base, but you still get all the other advantages of a Thunder Hammer. I would say this is probably his best weapon option if you just want to be able to, you know, kill normal things. You just want to be able to punch things, get that brutal on the go. Still probably his best weapon for killing things like Terminators because of the brutal. And probably also, initiative aside, probably your still best weapon in terms of damage output in a duel, even though it doesn't instant death. Again, it's going to wound things on a 2, it's got AP 2, and also it's going to do 2 saving throws per hit as well. But if you really do want him to fight other characters, you can also use the Paragon Blade, which is 20 points. Now, he'll only be strength 4 with a Paragon Blade, but since a lot of the time what we really care about is getting those murderous strikes off on a 6 to wound, when he does murder a strike, we know he's also going to wound at the same time as well. So that works out okay. And the Paragon Blade, you know, this guy's initiative 4, so he's going to go after most big Space Marine characters, but he's still going to go before things that are initiative 1. So if he does have this, it's also AP 2. He's, you know, going to use it to chop up Marines. And as with all Paragon Blades, you can always just get a lucky hit through before the enemy character attacks, and they can just die. So this is a good option. On Space Marine characters, I think the Thunder Hammer is always better, but on the Legate Marshal, I think the Paragon Blade is also a good option as well. Remember, you can Mastercraft these for 10 points as well, for a reroll to hit. if you want to. And he's not that expensive that you can't do that if you want to make him a bit better in combat. He's also got some good pistol options as well. And again, these come in at slightly cheaper than the Space Marine versions, which makes them quite attractive. So you can have an Inferno pistol. That's only 5 points for a melter shot. Now, if you are going to go into melee, you know, like blowing up one model before you go in is cool. Or having the option to maybe just melt something before you go in is cool. Also can be used in a pinch for a close-range anti-vehicle shot. Now, for 10 points in Space Marines, I'm not always a big fan of these, but for 5 points, that's a pretty good thing. Likewise, the Needle Pistol, very cheap as well. It gives you access to pinning. So it's got 2 shots, it's got no AP, but it wounds on a 3 with poisoned. So you've got a fair chance with his BS5 of getting a hit through to force someone to take a pinning test, which is good, you know, because it's very cheap. And then finally, he's got a few different armor options. So Artificer armor if you want to get his base save up. A Cyber Familiar, if you want him, the Cyber Familiar is 15 and the Iron Halo is 20. So if you just want to get him to a 4+ invulnerable, you buy the Cyber Familiar to give that bonus to his refractor field. But if you want to buy the Iron Halo and the Cyber Familiar, you can get him as far down as a 3+. Now, a lot of Space Marine characters can't do that. And I run that in my Iron Hands, and it's quite powerful to have a 3+ invulnerable, because what you can often do is let the other person hit you. They'll hit you a couple of times and just hope you roll your 3+ invulnerables and then just kill them in return when you get to go with your Thunderhammer in Space Marines. Now, it doesn't work quite as well here, but it does mean that we can use that Thunderhammer with this nice 3+ save. And, you know, even if the Space Marine characters or the other things he's fighting are better, it's very easy to roll 3 or even 4 dice and just pass all of those 3+, live, and kill the opponent from experience. So you can definitely build them to be good in combat if you want to as well. So you can use them with no upgrades to keep them as a buff piece. I think that will be quite a common way to run this guy. You know, 85 points, he's going to just sit in the unit with the command box, give everyone leadership 10, and give you access to your cohort doctrines. And if he dies, he dies. Maybe you'll just throw a power weapon on him or something like that. But I do think that you could also just give him the Iron Halo and Cyber Familiar as well to keep him alive a bit longer, you know, against things like snipers, because, you know, very valuable sniping this out to reduce the whole army's leadership. So that's definitely a way you could do it. But at that point, you might as well give him a weapon as well. So, you know, I think realistically, spending 135, 140 points on this guy plus a pistol, probably giving him all of that equipment, is a completely fine way to run him. It's not expensive. And it does mean that if you do have some Space Marines coming into the lines of your humans, you've got at least one guy who can chop a bunch of them up, you know, and he might not be the best in duels, but he can certainly win them in a pinch. He's certainly not a threat, and he can chop up units of Space Marines that are coming in with ease because he is pretty powerful. So all around, really good character, really well costed, and really good options for him as well. So the other HQ choice is the Auxilia Tactical Command Tercio. So this is also a HQ slot, 1 tactical command section, and 0 to 2 command companion sections. So these have got the elite human style stat line, so weapon skill and ballistic skill 4, initiative 4, 2 wounds and 2 attacks, so kind of like Space Marine veterans. Their leadership 7 and a 4+ save. They've also got stubborn as standard, which is pretty cool, and I would say that leadership 7 stubborn is better than your sort of standard Space Marine leadership 8. They are close order as well by default, so they got those close order benefits and drawbacks too. So 0 to 2 choices in that Tercio is the companion section. Now these are 60 points for 5 models. Bearing in mind they've all got 2 wounds and ballistic skill 4. That's pretty good really. 10 wounds for 60 points is, you know, the same as a unit of normal guys. And obviously you can upgrade this unit to be bigger as well. Very cost efficient. You can upgrade 1 model to be an adjutant, so an extra weapon skill attack, and leadership for leadership 8 for an extra 10 points, which you're probably not going to do with these guys because they're really a shooting unit, as we'll discuss in a sec. But, you know, cool option. Additional models for these are only 12 points each. So for 12 points, you're getting a 2 wound ballistic skill 4 model. Yes, they're only toughness 3, but that's great, because these guys get refractor fields and melter bombs as standard. So I would argue that 4+ save or a 5+ invulnerable is better than default power armor, and they are 2 wounds. So effectively, for about the cost of a Space Marine, these guys are probably better than a Space Marine, especially when you consider that they're going to be leadership 10 and they are also stubborn as well on top of that. You know, Space Marines can get buffs like that as well, but these get it very, very easily. So these guys are super powerful, especially when you consider they also come with melter bombs. The whole unit can take special weapons Flamers, plasma, melter guns being the obvious choices, but they've also got things like grenade launchers, which are pretty decent as well. Or they can all take charnable weapons and power weapons, and they also come with like a blast pistol and stuff too. The leader can take a power fist, although you can't get thunder hammers, unfortunately, but you can get power fists. They can take an augury scanner in the unit, so if you do take a lot of plasma, which is certainly going to be a good way to run this unit, you can make sure that they're getting those interceptors too. And then they can take Auroxes and Drakasans as a transport, as most infantry units can. All those options combined means this unit is super flexible and can do all sorts of different things, ranging from very powerful to just super fun. Like, I don't think a melee unit of companions is going to set the world on fire, and they're not particularly fast at getting there. They got no assault vehicles or anything like that, but it certainly looks cool and, you know, is an interesting option if you want some variety in your army. But from a power point of view, 10 of these guys with plasma guns in an Aurochs is 250 points. Now, a Space Marine Tactical Support Squad to do the same thing is 280 points, and that is a good unit. You know, we know in Space Marines, the problem with it is it's a bit easy to kill. These guys have got 20 wounds, where the Space Marines have only got 10, and they've got an invulnerable save for when they're being shot back at with something as well. So that however you cut it, whether they get shot with like machine gun style weapons or big weapons, they are going to survive longer for less points, and they have probably got better leadership while doing it as well. So this is a really, really good unit. Very reminiscent of things like Tempestus Scions or Imperial Guard command squads, the way they used to be used in Warhammer 40k. They're more like elite unit, really, rather than a HQ unit. You know, the way we build them out is like an elite unit taking the best weapons on the battlefield, but, you know, it is what it is. It's a cool unit. Again, like all of these infantry, though, very vulnerable to mass strength 6 firepower, so Volkite Culverins or assault cannons, or even things that do a large amount of hits that, you know, they only have a 4+ save against, like Flamers, can really hurt these guys. But that's kind of okay, because they're not expensive for what they do. And when you drive an Aurochs up the board and jump these guys out and plasma something, you probably don't expect them to survive anyway, but they have got more of a chance of surviving or will absorb more fire than the equivalent Space Marine units. Are really good, these. Really, really, really good. And if you do run them in the Tercio, you know, if you imagine maybe like 30 guys with plasma guns, you're going to take return fire from that once, possibly, if you do shoot at them, which is the kind of firepower that would take a Dreadnought off the board in one shot. So quite big potential there. The tactical command section that you have to take in this Tercio is very similar structurally to the companions that we've just talked about. So it's 105 points for 4 companions and a captain, which is obviously more expensive on a per model basis and brings the cost of the companion sections up a bit, because you've got to take this tactical command section, right? So although we talked about them being very good, the companions being very good compared to the Space Marine equivalent, they effectively go up in points because of this command section. But the command section itself's good. It comes with a captain who is 3 wounds and 3 attacks and 9 leadership. So he's a character. He's sort of like a Centurion equivalent character that happens to come with a unit. You can upgrade him further again to a Marshal. So another +1 weapon skill to make him 5, or well, +1 weapon skill to make him 5, +1 attacks, bringing his attacks up to 4 for only 10 points. So when you look at it in a vacuum, 105 points for a Centurion, well, a slightly better than Centurion in some ways level character, +4 2-wound guys, is also very cost effective. Only the fact that these captains aren't super powerful on their own, you know, means that even though they're kind of cheap, you know, we'd probably rather not pay for them in an ideal world if we're taking a Legate Marshal anyway. But, you know, it's not the worst spend in the world. Additional models, though, the extra companions, are still 12 points each, the same as the companion section. So that's pretty good. Again, they get refractor fields and melter bombs as standard, can take all the special weapons, charnable weapons, power fist as well. They can take heavy void armor on the leader for 10 points, which is worth considering probably. He's a 3-wound model with a slightly better save, which will save you maybe some hits if you're, you know, getting shot by some weapons that you're going to get a save against, which is a thing that the companion sections don't get. And then they've got some other equipment as well they can take the companion sections don't get. So the Command Vox is effectively an auto-include. It's 10 points. This unit has got leadership 9 natively, so that's going to give that to most of your army with Voxes, or if the Legate Marshal joins them, they're going to be pumping out the 10, and you've got that backup character even if you get sniped. The Augury Scanner likewise worth taking. Now, these can take a Cohorts Vexillor. So this is like a Space Marine standard, just a slightly worse version of one. So it makes a unit line, which is also really good. And they grant leadership 9 to units within 6 inches as well. Now that's kind of irrelevant because of the Vox network you're probably going to have. But on occasion, when you might get some Voxes sniped out, if they happen to be near this, it could be, a nice bonus. And this is also only cheap as well. Likewise, these can take Aurochs and Drachosans. And one thing to point out is that command Voxes specifically work when you are inside a vehicle. They also work when you're in reserves as well, which is interesting. So, it does add some value to taking a transport on these to keep them safe too. So you can build this squad in various ways. You can just keep it, you can buy it for 105 points and just keep it, again, as a leadership 9. You spend 10 on the command Vox and just hide it somewhere. And make sure that your army's got leadership 9, or maybe you hide the Marshal with them, and maybe you put them in an Auroch so they can't be shot by barrage weapons easily or something. Or you can just make them another ranged combat unit like the Companions. They're probably going to get shot first, especially if they've got the Marshal in it, which is a thing to consider when you think about tooling these up. Like, would you rather your opponent have to shoot at the Companions with plasma guns and leave your Marshal unit alone, or vice versa? And it could be a melee unit as well, potentially, although these guys aren't great in melee. If you've got the Legate Marshal tooled up, and you tool up the mini character in this, the Captain, and then give the whole unit power weapons, again, it's not like a high-end Space Marine elite unit, but it's certainly capable of putting up a good fight against a lot of things. And especially with how many Space Marine elite units tend to bring Thunderhammers for fighting other Space Marines. Thunderhammers are kind of overkill against these guys, so that works in your favour a little bit. All your guys will be going first, potentially. Maybe they can have a good go. Plus, it adds some variety to your army as well, which is, a cool thing, even if it's maybe not the best. So loads of stuff you can do with these guys. And again, very cost effective whilst doing it, which makes them a good option for the army. So recommended builds, well, these guys are so flexible. I could go on for, half an hour talking about recommended builds for these. And, I've already mentioned the fact that you can build your Marshal in a lot of different ways. You can build your units in a lot of different ways. So I'm just going to cover a couple of obvious things here. One thing you can do is just build the Marshal and the Command Tercio to minimum points value. So for 220 points, you get your Marshal, you get your Command Tercio, you get your Command Vox and your Aurochs, and you've got your 220 point unit that's not being tooled up at all. That will just provide leadership 10 and maybe hide. The reason I've included that here is that is the base you build that unit sort of from, right? So from there, you can maybe give the Marshal some extra survivability and a weapon for melee. You can give the leader of the Command Tercio an extra weapon for melee, and then you can stop there. So they can provide the leadership 10, maybe later in the battle they jump out and they go and punch something. Or you can make that unit bigger a little bit, potentially. You can add a few extra models to it as well, still fit in an Aurochs. Or you can make the unit bigger, get rid of the transport, and make it a shooty unit, and have them fight with the rest of the Tercio. The only concern I would have doing that is that they will always be the first thing that gets shot on the battlefield, and they will die. Whatever gets focused in this army is going to die. They're not that tough. So I would maybe consider, when you're running this Tercio, keeping the command units separate and letting maybe taking a couple of units of 10-man plasma and letting those guys run around together. So you're getting 20, maybe 20 Tercio reaction shots from those. Alternatively, you've got the full plasma command Tercio. Now, you might use this unit when you put your Legate Marshal somewhere else. Maybe he just goes and sits in a different squad that you've got in your army with a command Vox or something. And I've put this one in recommended builds just to highlight what you can do if you max this out. So it'd be a 10-man command section with plasma guns and 2 10-man companion sections with plasma guns as well, and an Aurochs. And that comes to 795 points. So still comes in a bit cheaper than the equivalent of 3 10-man Space Marine plasma units doing the same, which isn't like a common thing we see, but could be a thing. Certainly quite good for killing dreadnoughts and that kind of stuff. So you're getting 30 ballistic skill 4 plasma guns in transports which are good on their own as well once you've jumped out. So that's a nice thing to have in your army, and at least one very mean return fire when these guys drive up the battlefield, jump out, shoot something, maybe shoot multiple things, and then they get shot back and, do a big return fire. So that's good. And that still leaves you 1,200 points in your army to go and buy your Marshal and, a few Tercios of basic line troops and some tanks. So 800 points is a lot, but a lot of stuff in this army is cheap, so you can afford it. So tons of ways to use these guys, and I would definitely consider, even if only for variety and fun factor, certainly at least 2 on your Marshal up to fight stuff in melee, and considering giving him a bit of a command section bodyguard that can help him do that as well, just so you've got something else to do on the table other than shoot, because this army does shoot a lot. So to summarise everything, well, the Legate Marshal's great value compared to similar characters, even Space Marines, and he can more than hold his own in combat, including versus those Space Marine characters, if you tool them up for a completely reasonable point cost. That's as opposed to things like the Mechanicum Warlords, for example, where they can hold their own versus Space Marine characters, but they're very expensive to do sort of the same thing. So it's nice that this guy is on a par with the Marines in terms of what you spend for him. Companions, particularly as the unit, have a very efficient profile for their cost. 2 wounds for 12 points per model is just really good. And especially with their other stats and the way they can be equipped as well. And they can be outfitted in loads of different ways. Mostly powerful as a ranged unit, particularly with plasma, but you know, they can be fun and still quite effective as melee units, or with other ranged weapons if you want to give them other ranged weapons as well. You know, you certainly could run 5 of them with melter guns in an Aurochs or something like that, and although they would also probably die, that's 10 wounds as opposed to the 5 that the equivalent Space Marine unit would have, so still efficient. The Tactical Command section, likewise, exactly the same. Very cost-efficient unit, brings a mini character with leadership 9, who's also capable if you give him a weapon for a reasonable points cost. The Command Tercios do function more like elites for me, and I think from a flavour point of view, I would rather my HQ unit did things to command the army on the battlefield, rather than being, you know, units full of plasma guns, because that very much feels like they should be an elite slot kind of thing doing that. So from a flavour point of view, I would rather it wasn't constructed like this, but it doesn't really make a difference. It's not the biggest complaint in the world, but that is the way they function. They are more like elite units. You just need to really think about what you do with your command unit in the Tercio if you've only got one in your army and your Legate Marshal needs somewhere to command from. All around, though, excellent HQ choices for the Solar Auxilia. It could even form the core of your army if you wanted them to, like we've said. Really good options, really characterful ways to build them. Really interesting trying to make these tooled up humans take on Space Marines in melee, potentially as well. And yeah, more good slots to fill for the Solar Auxilia army. That's the end of the show. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please do like and subscribe on YouTube, and do leave me any feedback in the comments below. Don't forget to join us on Discord as well. That's linked in the video description. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll see you for the next episode. Bye-bye.